Hi, welcome back to AP Macroeconomics with your favorite teacher, me, Mr. Fritz. Today we're going to talk about the expected inflation rate, the actual inflation rate, and how that affects the real interest rate. In order to show the difference between the expected inflation rate and the actual inflation rate, I'm going to use the Phillips Curve. So first, let's review how that works real quick. The Phillips Curve graph shows the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Remember, the short-run Phillips curve is downward sloping because in the short run there is an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. As inflation goes down, unemployment goes up, and vice versa. In the long run Phillips curve is straight up and down because there is no trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the long run. We can always operate at the natural unemployment rate. For this example, we're going to start long-run equilibrium at the natural unemployment rate and our expected inflation rate of 2%. Remember, the short-run Phillips curve itself, the whole thing, represents our expected inflation rate when we are at full employment. Right now, that's what we're dealing with. So first, I'm going to walk into a bank and take out a loan. We have an expected inflation rate of 2%, so my bank's going to charge me something in relation to that expected inflation rate. Let's say that they're going to start by charging me 4%. Remember, the Fisher equation shows that the real interest rate is going to be equal to the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. And so if I have a nominal interest rate of 4% with a 2% expected inflation rate, well then my real interest rate is going to be 2%. That's what I'm really paying back over the life of the loan based on what inflation is doing to the power of the dollar. Now let's say that there's an increase in consumer confidence. Everybody's feeling great about the future of the economy, and so people are out there spending. Consumers are buying more goods and services. That's going to cause aggregate demand to increase and shift to the right. When aggregate demand increases and shifts to the right, we end up with a higher price level and a lower unemployment rate. More people are buying things and businesses are going to start hiring more people. And so what's going to happen to my dot here is it's going to move up toward a higher inflation rate and a lower unemployment rate. So we can call this B. Well, now my inflation rate is something greater than what we expected. This is unanticipated inflation. We're ending up with higher prices than me or the bank thought there was going to be. So let's just say that this is 3%. I'm just going to make that up. If my loan had a fixed interest rate of 4% and now prices are actually rising at a rate of 3% rather than 2%, well then my real interest rate has fallen. As a borrower, I'm going to be better off when there's unanticipated inflation. Prices are increasing more quickly than I or the bank thought they would, and so my real interest rate is now lower. I'm still paying back the same amount of money each month, but now each dollar that I get back to the bank is worth less than we thought. The bank is obviously going to be worse off then. Other people that are going to be worse off now that there's unanticipated inflation will be people on fixed incomes. If someone gets a $1,000 Social Security check each month and now prices are up higher than we thought, what they get in their paycheck or their Social Security check is not going to buy them as much stuff this month as it did last month. Now let's look at the opposite effect happening, unanticipated disinflation. We're again going to be starting at full employment output, but what happens now if consumer confidence falls and people stop buying things? Well, it's again going to affect aggregate demand, consumers. Aggregate demand decreases and shifts to the left, and now we're in a recession. That means our price level is going down and our unemployment is increasing. So my dot will move along the curve to the right, toward higher unemployment, and it's moving along the curve again because this is a short-run effect, a shift in aggregate demand. Now our unemployment rate is greater than the natural rate, and our inflation is less than anticipated. We have a lower inflation rate, I'll call it 1%, than we anticipated. So what will that do to my real interest rate now? If I still have a 4% nominal interest rate because I got a fixed interest rate loan, and now inflation is only 1% instead of the 2% that we expected, well then my real interest rate is going to be higher than I or the bank thought that it was going to be. This is going to be bad for me because now the money that I'm paying back to the bank is worth more than I anticipated, so it's hurting me more to give that back money that could buy me so much more goods and services than I expected. And for the bank, they're going to be better off. They're going to be getting paid back with a dollar that is worth more than they anticipated. Now finally, let's take a look at what would happen if we had an increase in our expected inflation. If banks and consumers and everybody thought that prices were going to be rising by an even higher amount in the future, well then our expected inflation rate increases, and if that occurs, remember the short-run Phillips curve represents our expected inflation rate. So if we have an increase in expected inflation, then the whole curve is going to shift out to the right. Short-run Phillips curve. And now our expected inflation rate is 3%. Remember when prices ended up increasing at a greater rate, or we had unanticipated inflation, and my old loan that was written when there was a 4% interest rate, that ended up leading to me having a lower real interest rate of 1%. Remember, that was good for me, bad for the bank. So you can keep that in mind when we're talking about expected inflation. Now that we have an increase in expected inflation, well, banks aren't going to keep charging this 4% nominal interest rate. Why would they do that? That's going to eat into the profits. They do not want to end up with a lower real interest rate. They want to make sure they're getting paid back the amount of money that they expected to be paid back. And so what's going to happen now, this increase in the expected inflation rate is going to cause banks to not want to lend money unless they can lend it for at least 5%. So now the nominal interest rate is going to rise to 5%. We still have that higher 3% inflation rate, and that's going to leave us with the same old 2% real interest rate. Banks aren't dumb. They're not going to keep making out loans while they're taking losses. They're going to raise the nominal interest rate to make up for that increase in inflation, and that's going to cause the real interest rate to stay the same. So remember, that's the Fisher effect. An increase in the expected inflation rate will not change the real interest rate. It will only cause the nominal interest rate to increase by whatever amount the inflation rate rose by. So that's been the difference between expected inflation rates and unanticipated inflation. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.